Welcome to Lemonade Learning, a refreshing look at learning today. We serve up high impact practical strategies alongside honest and energizing stories to help educators.
Make the most of your moments, lead and learn with purpose, and craft lifetime lemonade from the sweets and sours of education. Join us for a glass.
Hey everybody, it's Bree.
And Lainey, welcome. We've got another twofer. We've got Erin Murphy and Ross Cooper. And I'm going to toss to you, Ross, to go ahead and introduce yourself first.
Yep. So as you said, my name is Ross Cooper. Currently, I'm an assistant principal in elementary school in Westchester, New York. Before that, I've been a fourth grade teacher. I've been a elementary school principal, K through 12 curriculum supervisor. That's kind of boring. I started with all these titles, but it's terrible. So from an educational standpoint, yes, that's where I am. I guess I probably should have started with my why. My big why for doing all this, I think, is like this whole idea that, be the person or be the educator you needed when you were younger. And I absolutely love working with students. And this whole idea of student empowerment, student voice and choice, student-centered learning, and just, meeting students where they are, rather than students meeting us where they are. And that's really my why for becoming an educator, and for my why for why I do what I do every day.
I love it. Erin, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Erin Murphy, and I am currently the humanities supervisor in a district right outside Allentown, Pennsylvania. And super recently, I am also serving as the interim middle school principal. So that is just a little extra hat right now. And I taught kindergarten, second, third, fifth grade, spent some time as a technology coach. And most recently, I just finished my doctorate from Vanderbilt. Yeah. So I focused on adult learning theories and adult learning. So
That's
super excited to be here.
That's a passion of mine. So we'll have to chat more about that. So I didn't hear, Bree, did I miss it? Did either of them say author?
No, neither. They did not. So, and not just one, but we got a couple. So here we go. Let's talk about this. Let's chat a little bit about some books.
Do you want to mention some titles? One's pretty new. I know we don't have a lot of people watch because we don't talk about the fact that we have a YouTube one as well. So most people are listening. They don't know I'm waving your latest book around.
Yeah.
So the latest book is called, I'll talk about the old book. So the old book was Hacking Project-Based Learning. That was our first foray. And I think it's funny that I don't know, I don't think we wrote a book for the purpose of we wanted to write a book so much as we wanted to tell the story of how we learned how to do project-based learning, and how we learned how to do it effectively. So Hacking PBL was our first sort of step into that. And then the second book was sort of not so much an encore as a more. So Ross, do you want to talk a little bit about the new book?
Yeah. I think it was kind of, I think the first book came out maybe like 3.5, 4 years ago. And it was like, okay, since then we've done a whole lot of presenting, consulting, work in and out of our districts. And it's like, okay, now we have more to say. So that's how the second book came about. And I think actually, the second book in a way, it encompasses all the best from the first book, I think. In a way, kind of almost makes the first book obsolete. And I probably shouldn't be saying that, but I think if you buy the first book and you've really read it and processed it, you maybe don't need the first book. So I would just recommend the second book. But it's really, we had more to say. And I think also I felt like personally, and I think I could speak for Erin too, is that there was a need for a practical kind of down to earth PBL book. I think project-based learning is one of those things where we've all been introduced to it by our districts, probably, right, in some way, shape, or form at a certain point in time. And we've seen these videos, and it's great, but like cutting through the clutter, what is it and how do we do it? I still think those answers, in a way, aren't really out there, or weren't really out there, in an accessible, practical way. Yes, you could probably find them with Genius Hour, design thinking, things that are a little bit more straightforward, where the process and the steps are a little bit more straightforward. But when it came to PBL, I think there was still some demystifying that needed to be done, right? And some lingering questions that were out there. And that's really what we tried to encompass in that book. So not only is it something that's near and dear to our hearts, but we thought there was a need for this. There was a need for this all-encompassing book that answered those questions in a practical way.
Yeah. Well, and I'm a huge fan of the book. And as someone who has done professional learning for my peers about project-based learning, and it's always, unfortunately, it hasn't usually been the way that I would like it to be, where it's an ongoing job embedded support thing. It's usually like a district or a school's like, we want to do project-based learning. Lainey, can you come in and do 6 hours? And I'm like, yes.
Good luck.
What's the plan for when I leave? And so I would actually feel very good saying, get Ross and Erin's book, because this is going to really help you move that forward. And one of the things I love that you say in the book, and I actually think it's from your first book, is that project-based learning is like a series of best practices joined together. And I think let's leave that as a teaser, and we'll get to your sweet and sour. Bree's laughing because I'm like so checking boxes. She knows how linear I am. And if we like go out of order and we don't do sweet and sour, I will possibly have a seizure and stroke out. It's going to be hard for me. So, so I'm going to toss to Erin for your sweet and sour, and then we'll get back to talking about project-based learning.
Okay, so something sweet, so like something good happening. Well, my girls and I got to go kayaking this morning on one of my favorite lakes nearby. So that's the first sweet that came to mind.
That's pretty sweet.
Yeah. And I guess my sour is this terrible TikTok thing going around with our middle and high schoolers where kids are like trashing bathrooms and stealing stuff. It's horrible magic. So that's my sour.
I just read about that this morning. I feel like an old person who doesn't know what's going on in the world.
I
know
like
Ross's eyes.
We had sinks torn off of walls. It was something out of a movie. I can't even. So that's my sour.
It's pretty sour.
It is pretty sour.
Ross, what about
Ross?
Yeah, my sweet is, I mean, I'll keep it education related, is I could say I'm tremendously proud of where we are as a school, where I am now at Roaring Brook School and Chappaquiddick Central School District. Well, the last 2 years, I was talking to one of my coworkers this morning. The last 2 years have been the hardest 2 years of my career, for various reasons, moving to a new district, the pandemic and all that. And yes, we're still in the middle of a pandemic, but where we are as a building and the way that the teachers that I serve and coworkers have persevered has been probably the most inspiring thing that I've seen in, I think, about 12 years. I've been in education about 12 years. In the 12 years I've been in education, and it feels like we could finally kind of breathe again. At least I could speak for myself. Like we could finally kind of breathe again. Yes, we're still going through things, but it's like, okay, like we could take a deep breath. And there's a little bit more time now, like during the day, there's time to have good conversations. There's, I think, going to be a good amount of time this year to focus on curriculum and instruction, and actually centering the students, which is why we got into this in the first place. So that's really my sweet. My sour, that's interesting. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure.
I mean, it's hard when you're here with us to think about anything that's not amazing.
Everything. No, I mean, everything's good. I mean, I don't know. I don't really have like a sour. I don't know. I don't really have like a sour right now. I think if anything, like building off of the sweet is like, the amount of work that needs to be done. There's a like, no matter where you are, like everybody's learning and everybody's growth and everybody's school and district is in a different place. And I think the amount of work that we have in front of us could be a little bit daunting. And I think it's a matter of, this whole idea of like mile wide, inch deep. If you try to focus on too much, you don't get anything done well. So it's focusing on like, what are we going to prioritize? What are those couple things we're going to prioritize, and just digging in deep and being effective. And so I think the work, it could be daunting. So that might be the sour, that, the thinking about like what the work that lies ahead. Yeah.
Well, and I know for me, like one of the struggles that I'm having is we know there's work to be done. And it's like, okay, let's go. Oh, you're not ready? Okay, we're good. Like, how do we move forward when I'm not sure how the others I work with are, how ready are they, if that makes any sense? Like I want to, that's kind of my coping mechanism, is I kind of overfunction. And so I worry that me overfunctioning is going to stress other people out, and that's not how they cope. And so I think that for me, that's one thing I'm probably struggling with. Bree probably feels that.
I'll chime in, and because this came up recently in a conversation, like if you don't know, like if you're not sure if the people you work with are ready, ask them.
Yeah.
And that might sound like, that might be like, duh.
Yeah.
That doesn't, just throwing it out there, that doesn't always happen. That's the saying. So, yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, I mean, I think that that's, between the two of you, I think that that's one of the things that is a huge connection piece, because given all that is going on, and trying to prioritize, where do we lean in? Where do we lead? Where do we maintain? Right? Like, I mean, I think that that's one of those elements in education, regardless of a pandemic, whatever's going on. We're always trying to find out, like, where do we where do we need to turn the dial up a little bit and like really make sure that we're getting this in? Where do we feel like, okay, yes, we've got some consistency in here, and so now we're able to kind of like move forward? And then where do we just kind of like, okay, we're going to have to triage that and come back to that at another place? And I think that, to me, that really does mirror a lot of the philosophy of PBL, right? Like that it's not just going to be this like one solution. Now we grab it off of the shelf and we just push it forward. But instead we're really going to try to adapt it and make sure that it's individual and it really does reflect what's happening. At the same time, like both of you, I are very, very passionate about this topic, and it can be, oftentimes misconstrued to where people are just thinking like, yep, I like PBL. We do a project once a year and everything's great and check, now we're done. And, but at the same time, like it is such a nebulous topic that it can also become very overwhelming, where people feel like, oh, I need to have a PhD in PBL in order to be able to throw that out there for you, Erin, where it's like, how do we, so how are both of you, like, what are your takes on that? How do you keep in mind that really truly right now, with a lot of the things that are happening through the transitions that we're in education, that we are kind of in an opportunity where we can create a lot more focus on leveraging PBL, where we really have some environmental characteristics that are letting that happen. But at the same time, we've got a lot of people that are already wide-eyed with everything else that's going on, and they feel like, okay, now great, you're going to take away or not take away, but like now you're going to push me in a way that I'm not ready prepared for. So how are you guys seeing that? What are your options and choices and some, maybe even some bits of advice that we can take away from this?
I'm gonna jump in, because there's one thing that like really stood out to me as you were sort of explaining that context, right? So like where are the push points that we can move forward right now versus what do we need to just like wait for? So there's a district that I've been working with pretty closely in New Jersey, and Lainey, I can't remember whether we were talking about this before we started or, in the meeting, but we were talking about like the fact that often like those once and done PDs are not as effective as like long-term coaching. And luckily I've been working with this district for a really long time. And one of the things I've been pushing on there has been audience, right? So like one of the core components of project-based learning is the audience that the students are creating for. And I think that perhaps one happy accident that is coming out of the pandemic is the tools that we now like use almost like a second nature are changing the audience that students can access for their work. Like I can very easily now Zoom with an architect who is really good at building things underwater. Like I can very easily, contact my local congressperson. Like I know how to use these tools that perhaps in the past we've been hesitant to give to our students. So that was something that they were all sort of like, oh, I know I can do that now. That's no problem. So that's definitely one push point that can be easily changed now that we've adapted to this like gray school world.
I think also it's like, I've seen this like during the pandemic and not during the pandemic, is like when we specialize in something, we convince ourselves that's what our school needs, right? So like, we could just use project-based learning as an example. Like, like, oh, like, we hired the PBL guy. We hired the guy who wrote a PBL book. That must mean we're all going to have to do PBL, or like standards-based grading, right? Like, you come into a district as a new administrator And it's like, I know what the solution is. Like, this is what we need to do. And I think it's focusing on like what's right and not what's easy, right? And like really just taking an objective look at like where you are and saying, like where do we need, what do we need, and doing that collaboratively, right? This idea of once again asking people, and really like a lot of times I think we say we're gauging the pulse of people, but we're really just convincing ourselves that we want to go into the direction that we want to go in, or that we need to go into the direction that benefits us, right? Or that we want to go in. And I think it's easy to do that. And that's one of the reasons why like this whole like narrative, like, oh, like because of the pandemic, now schools are ripe for change. We don't want to go back to what, happened before. Or what was taking place before. And I think to an extent that is true, but I think to an extent that narrative is that who's spreading that, right? Like, is it being spread by the teachers who are in the classroom each and every day? Is it being spread by a community and our students? Or is it being spread by so-called like change agents who want to implement something that benefits them? So just throwing that out there. So I think it's a matter of like looking objectively at where we are and collaboratively kind of deciding what we should prioritize and where we need to go. I will say in the district that I'm in now, we have been, that being said, we are doing project-based learning, right? But I will say the way I tackled it was I've been where I am for 2 years now, and always like relationships first, right? Always relationships first. Granted, we could always get better in that area, but I do honestly think that's something I prioritize. And then when the new book came out, I think it was like last April or May, I wanted my teachers to get it. I wanted the teachers I have that I serve to have it.
Yeah.
But I didn't charge them or anything like that. I didn't say like Venmo me. I know Erin did that. I didn't do it. No, I'm kidding. But I didn't. But I didn't want to do it. No, you want to do it in a way like, if this is like I really value the people that I work with, and I really value this work. So therefore, I wanted the people I serve to have this work, if that makes sense. So how do you do that in a way that's not kind of like, how do you do that in the right way? And I asked a couple of our teachers, and they said, just throw the books into the faculty room, and then shoot out an email and say, if you want one, grab a copy. And it was neat. Like they were gone, and then like I had to put more in there, and some of them wanted me to autograph, and it meant a lot. And then organically, some of them said, are we going to do anything with this? I'm like, you want to do something with this? We can. So over the summer, we put together what we call in my district like a learning team, which is 15 hours of professional learning. So it's like a full day over the summer, and then 6 hours during the school year, spread out across 4 1.5-hour sessions, for a total of 15 hours. So we did a learning team, and I want to say, so we put it out across the district, but I will say, I think about like 15 teachers from the school I'm at joined, which is like awesome, so it's like more organic rather than saying you have to do this. So that's like one way to tackle it. Once again, like not really, more of a pull than a push, I think. And also relationships first. If this was my first year in the school, or my second year, I'd probably handle it in a little bit of a different way. Or the teachers would have probably been like, who the heck is this guy pushing his book on us, right? So I think that illustrates the importance of relationships and sometimes pulling rather than pushing.
Well, and you're so naturally doing choice, right? That's in your DNA. And it would feel probably a little ironic if you're like, read my book about choice. You have no choice. Read this book. But I really do hope people read the book. Again, I know Bree is a huge fan of project-based learning too. And I think that it can feel overwhelming, but the way that you all have written the book with multiple entry points is super accessible. So I really appreciate that, because I feel like we can all have that focus. Like Erin was talking about, the authentic audience can be a focus, right? For me, questioning is usually what I lead with when I work with a group. I'll do the question formulation technique, and I'm really pushing for inquiry, because I feel like for me, that's the way that that's like the gateway to PBL, right? Like I'm just going to get them started. And then I will encourage them. Lately, I've been saying, as much as you can and is appropriate, delay direct instruction. Like if you, when you're doing your planning, can think about how you can delay direct instruction to give more options for exploration, investigation on the front side, then that's really starting to lead down that path. And, there's lots to do with PBL. There's lots of components, but I really just love how you make it very accessible. Like, here's a best practice. If you put all of these together, you're doing project-based learning. And so,
yeah, you talked about that during your the webinar that you did, Lainey. The idea of like the 5 engage, explore, explain, elaborate, evaluate. And we actually we thought about, do we mention those 5 E's in the inquiry chapter? And sometimes it's like it turns into buzzword bingo. So we left that out, but that's really what it is. Like looking at we have this idea that gradual release and errorless learning is the way to go. And I think that it's like a paradigm shift. Like, how do we not do that? The other thing I'll say in that regard is like this idea of like PBL initiatives, I'll just be blunt. Like, I've heard in the past through my experiences that I write about PBL, speak about PBL, like that's what Erin and I do. Well, all that stuff. And then it's like, well, what is he doing in his district? Like, why is there no PBL initiative? Like, he's a fraud. And I've been called a fraud, but I love it. It's great. So it's like
the New Yorker in you. I don't think most people love that, but yes.
It's fine. I don't care. Throw stones at me. I don't care. So I think it's this idea that one, you have to be ready for it, right? Like relationships first. So if somebody's saying you're a fraud, maybe that person doesn't understand culture, but also maybe that person doesn't really understand project-based learning. And this idea that if you're focusing on inquiry, and you're focused on flexible seating, and you're focusing on effective feedback, those are all components of PBL. So it's really just, it's good practice. So this idea of having to do PBL because my district isn't, or my school isn't necessarily doing a PBL initiative, doesn't mean I'm not actively promoting PBL in my space. Does that make sense? So it's not black and white. There's plenty of building blocks, and you could be focusing on one of those building blocks. And the same for a lot of other practices too. So,
well, and Lainey,
I am not a fraud. I'm not. Well, maybe I am. I don't know.
No, you're not. You're not.
Lainey, you said something else that I think was that. If I had to choose one word about, what do I wish for people approaching project-based learning? I think the word is probably approachable, because I think that for a really long time, people and organizations were working really hard to put PBL up on on a pedestal almost, and make it seem like it was only accessible to certain people that were able to do it in this particular way. Yep. And I just think I have a problem with pedestals. That's a whole other podcast maybe. But I think that being able to make it approachable and look at it as its individual components, and finding your entry point and finding where you are on the continuum, I think that that's really the way to think about project-based learning.
And I think, to be honest, and I really don't want this to turn into anything negative, but I feel like there was, in an effort to contrast project-oriented learning with project-based learning, there was almost some shaming, almost to kind of go with what you're saying about the pedestal. Well, no. If you're not doing it exactly like this, you're not doing it. Don't you dare call it that. Mm-hmm. So I just really gravitate towards how accessible it is. And, you guys talk about the gradual release of responsibility, and that happens for all learners of, as Bree would say, all ages and stages, right? So it's not just gradual release for kids, it's for adults as well. So bringing things into their practice as it's appropriate. I don't know. What do you think, Bree?
Well, one of the questions that I keep coming back to in my head as you guys are talking is that I would love for you to do. So I'm going to preface it while I talk real quick so you can think, is if you could just kind of define PBL for people, for the average person, what would that be to help people? I love, Erin, that you said approachable. I do think it's one of those, and at the time we have a session, I end up using this phrase, but I do feel like PBL ends up being one of those Princess Bride words, right? Where we always say this is a word that you don't think that, it's you keep saying this word, but you really don't know what this word means. And I think that is something that happens. And a lot of it is because it crosses into so many different synonyms and different things like that for us, right? We start throwing out inquiry, we start throwing we have so many different touch points for that word that I also think that in an effort to make it accessible and approachable for many people, we oftentimes convolute it instead of creating, kind of an opportunity for people to really come at it at their own, of their own accord. And so so now that I've said that enough, I think I've bought you enough time. Like, what is a distilled definition that if you only had like 15 seconds with a faculty that you would be like, this is what PBL is? What would your answer to that be?
I have one. Do you want me to go first, Ross?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that the simplest way I have described it, and I think we say this in the book too, is learning through doing. Like if I hadn't used an economy of words, that's it. Learning through doing.
All right, Ross, that's pretty succinct. I mean, what would you
His
like
won't be that succinct.
No, I mean,
challenge?
yeah. I think when Lainey, you talked about inquiry, and inquiry could be applied to anything, like an activity, a lesson, a unit, which is why it's such a great entry point into project-based learning. So I think when you have inquiry, like students are learning through investigation and exploration. To me, that's like what inquiry is. And when you have inquiry span across an entire instructional unit, that's when you have project-based learning. So to me, I define project-based learning as an inquiry-based unit. I think also it's an inquiry-based instructional unit at its core. That's what it is. Now you could start saying it needs to have certain components, right? Like if you look at components, like you need to have an authentic audience, you need to have student voice and choice, you need to have feedback. So you could have all those components too, but at its core, it's really about student inquiry. And I'll say one more thing because I've been on this kick for a couple of years now about like this idea of defining something. I think it's important as an organization that you have a definition. And it's okay that if your definition is a little bit different than another organization's definition, but I think it's the idea that when we're saying the same thing, we're meaning the same thing. And I think that's really important, not just with project-based learning, but anything else or any other initiative or whatever, or instructional shift, whatever it might be. But I think it's important also not to weaponize that definition. So like if I'm an administrator, I'm going into your classroom, if like a third grade teacher, I'll give a shout out to like a third grade teacher I work with, Melissa Billing. She's wonderful. If I go in, she's like, come to my classroom and see me do project-based learning. And I go in there, I'm like, well, that's not PBL, or that's, you know what I mean? Like then I'm essentially weaponizing it as an administrator and saying, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. The same thing with anything else, right? Like that's not differentiated instruction. That's not reading and writing workshop. And when we talk in those terms, we maybe intentionally or unintentionally like weaponize this definition. And I think rather than approaching instructional leadership and coaching through that lens, it's more like, that's great. I love what you're doing. Now let's discuss how to make it more student-centered, right? Now let's discuss how you chose your audience and how you might do that again with more intentionality, right? So you have this definition, you're using it to promote a clear vision, but once again, you're not holding it over like people's heads. I think that's really important. So, but to answer your question succinctly, PBL is an inquiry-based unit.
Yeah, I like that.
I do too. I think that and I appreciate the coming to that common understanding and definition of it too. I think that is, just like you said, so important for whatever we're talking about, whether it's educational theory or our practices that we're trying to put forward in the school. Having that common understanding, that common vision of what it is that we're trying to achieve allows us to really internalize and create our individual method for.
I think I heard a dog start barking.
Yeah, so they wanted to jump in on that as well. They thought that they really liked that. They wanted to give us some props for that. So I think that it's super important to have that. Like, I know a lot of times people push back. I worked with a superintendent who really he resisted to define things because he wanted people to feel that they could have their own interpretation on that. And I pushed back on that a little bit with you have to have a common embrace of that term. Like we all have to speak a similar language in order to then put our own spin on it, right? Like, we can all say like, here's the shirt that you're going to wear, or, you need to wear a shirt, but you don't have to say this is the only shirt that's available. Right. So like, I think it's giving that, how the more that we can understand what the parameters are, like to borrow from design thinking, right? Like the more constraints that we have, that we understand this is where our, these are the pillars and our walls that we have, then we know how to color it the way that we want it to be in order to get that across. So I think that's really great advice from that implementation standpoint of understand, come to it. Don't just make it that, I have a phrase that I call bobblehead implementation, right? Like where one person's like, hey, we're going to go and do this. And they just throw it out there and everybody's like, yeah, we are. And we have no idea what we're talking about, but we're just doing it because the boss said that we were going to do it. And instead we really have to like, make sure that we're all bobbing our head in unison. Like at least we got to get something going correct in that to where we know that we're following that in those same pieces.
I wrote that down. I like that bobblehead implementation.
Well, and I was thinking, that Noster managing complex change chart, I always go straight to that. And so I hear you both talking about like, what's the first thing? Vision. When that's missing, what does that lead to? Confusion. And so when we're not defining these terms, when we're not giving that clear vision, that is going to lead to confusion. And how am I going to know if I'm successful if I don't know where you want me to be? If you give me the destination, I'll find the way there with some support. But I need some help with where do I want to be? Where do you need me to be?
I think sometimes the biggest issue in that regard is like sometimes we think we're being clear, but we're not.
That's true.
Right. And
it's so clear in my head.
Yeah, exactly. Because you've been obsessing about it for the past like year. You've been reading books on it. You've been reading articles on it. You maybe went to a full day of professional development on it, but the people you serve didn't do anything. Right. So it's like all your knowledge and all your experience isn't just going to magically reach them unless the proper communication takes place. I think during a PBL session, Erin and I, we haven't shown this video in a while, but there was this like insurance company. They were showing like this video. It's like the guy comes in and he's like, what is the video? It's like you have a termite problem.
Yeah, it's
right? Like, there's termites, and then like he just leaves, right? And then it's like there's an issue, and it's like the equivalent of saying to teachers like, you need to do PBL. Oh, you need to differentiate. The one I hear the most is like, you need to do a better job of personalizing your learning for your students.
Oh, that's super clear.
Right. And that, but like we think we're being clear and we're not, right? Yeah. So it's like ambitions in the absence of explicit strategies, and that leads to anxiety, right? And then even if you dig deeper, like if I was a teacher and administrator came into my room and said that, like, oh, you need to do a better job personalizing learning for your students. Okay, how? Right.
Yeah.
And then could that person even answer that question is another story. So I think it's just really you can never really over communicate, right? Like over communicate.
Yeah.
And just making sure that we're being entirely clear. I mean, so
one of my like core leadership practices now, which again, as most of our core practices, as they develop, is usually because you did something wrong. So something that I did wrong that now I have learned to do better is I'm really clear about what I'm not saying also. Ooh. So, after something's communicated, and I think that this has been so critical over the last, surviving through the pandemic, is like, okay, so I just said all these words at you. Let me be really clear in summary. This is what I'm not saying. Mm-hmm. So like, I'll take Ross's personalized learning example. Like, I want you to personalize learning. And then I probably said a whole bunch of words at you. Here, what I'm not saying is you don't need to start. I'm not saying you need to start this tomorrow. I'm not saying that you need to do this by yourself. I'm like, just being really crystal clear about that part too I think is really important from the leadership lens.
It reminds me of a book that I read in my master's program, and it's that telling isn't training, right? So like, just because you told somebody doesn't mean that you explained it. Just because you said this is what we're doing, it doesn't mean that you actually like brought in all of those elements, set up the environment and the strategies that are really necessary, the resources that you need to make available to people. I think that is is one of those pieces that we forget. Like we're like, yep, no, we said we were going to do it, and that means that this is what's happening. And so I think keeping in mind for our educators, whenever we are, if we're leading something, like keeping in mind, just like in our classroom, we're going to have some differentiation of readiness, and people are going to latch onto that at a different rate. We're going to see that happen with our adult learners as well, and with our educators at that point.
Yep.
So I want to share just the structure of the new book, because this is part of, to me, what makes it so accessible. And you all talk about in the beginning, like this book is the answer to the questions you've been getting since you wrote the first book. And so I love how the structure of the chapters is, they most start with how do I, and then it's structure a PBL experience, get grades, conference with students, include direct instruction. It's all of these things that I have had a lot of educators come to me grappling with. And so you've given them some tools and some strategies to help them work through that. So I think that's really, really helpful. And I didn't hit all of the chapters, but I do think people should check it out if they want to learn about PBL. I think I read the book in like 3 days because I just was so excited about it. I mean, I gave Ross a copy of Evolving Learner and I haven't heard a word, but that's okay. Cause he's a busy guy, and he where were you last night for dinner? Communal Kitchen. I know that because you posted it on Twitter. You're a busy guy. So, but no money for promoting the book. I just love it so much. And Erin, I think you appreciate when I tease Ross too. So hopefully
I do. I'm here for it.
Okay, good. Okay, good. But no, I do love the structure of the book, and I love how you can actually just go to a section. Like if I'm really struggling with grades and PBL, like how does that look? I go to that section first. Like am I saying that correctly? Like to me, you don't need to read the book cover to cover. You can actually jump around to what your focus is at the time. Do you feel comfortable with me saying that?
Yeah, I think so. And I think like, to use your example, like if you go to, I think it's chapter 2, how do I get grades?
Yep.
Is there might be some terms in there that are borrowed from another chapter, right? I think like progress assessment tool that you might have to flip to another chapter to figure out, exactly what that is. But for the most part, yes, you could do that. But I think also what we were key about is like, we didn't just want a book of like FAQs. We wanted to make sure that in reading through all these questions, we were giving you the forest from the trees, right? So like, not only are your questions being answered, but in reading the book from front to back, you're also learning how to essentially do project-based learning, which I think is really important. We didn't want people to read this and be like, all right, I got my questions are answered, but I still don't know how to do PBL. So we wanted to have both. Like we wanted both to be packed into the book.
Right. I think like hacking project-based learning, what we did was we tried to make planning a project as like the simplest terms possible. And then what would happen was we would go and we would present on that book, and we would present the content from that text. And then the people in the audience, rightfully so, would be like, yeah, but, and how actually? And so we started to write down those questions, and we sort of explained this at the beginning of the book, and they were the same all the time. Yep. So then we were like, okay, well, let's just like restructure here. Let's just start with what we know the questions are. And then we layered in the stuff from like the previous text about like how to plan it. Mm-hmm. So that's really how the text itself emerged. Yeah. And really organic from like what people really wanted to know. So I think that maybe that's why I appreciate all the kind words you're saying about it, because I think that that's why people like it, is because it is all the things that they had in their head, possibly before they even picked up the book. So
I think also one more thing I'll add is that I think we use this term in like maybe the introduction is like a progressive educator toolkit, like almost like if you're, this is like kind of a bit of a generalization, but like if you're like an administrator and you want your teachers to move forward with their practices, you want your building to be more innovative or progressive, blah, 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 like what book would you give them? And not just the book for inspiration, but the book to say, hey, like this book will actually show us how to do it. Mm-hmm. That's what we are trying to accomplish. And I think yes, it has PBL in the title, but I think to an extent, it hits upon all those things that that teachers and educators would need to be quote unquote like progressive, if that makes sense. And then I think because we want it to be kind of like a toolkit, we intentionally referenced a lot of like outside resources, that, and also we're standing on the shoulders of giants. So these ideas aren't always like our own originally. So we were intentional about like listing and having the names of and resources that have really inspired us along the way. They're in there. And then it also intentionally links to our book's website to make those resources and people as accessible as possible. So that's kind of what I always think. Like if you're like, once again, like if you're that, if like, okay, like I'm a principal and we need to move into the 21st century. What is the book we give our teachers? You know what I mean? And like, there's so many out there, right? There's so many out there. And we wanted this to be one of those books.
It's awesome. And I have checked out the website and you all have some great resources there. In fact, I use your gradual release of responsibility for moving from, and not that you would move away from teacher feedback, but how can we build on teacher feedback to go to peer feedback and to go to self feedback. So I hope I got those terms right, but I actually have that in one of my slide decks and I'm like, go check out their website. They've got lots of cool stuff. So I feel like I'm really fangirling on you guys this episode, but I do really love the book. And so I hope people check it out. And then Bree, any last questions before I know we got to let them go in a few minutes and I want to make sure they have time to share their handles and how people can connect with them and get a copy of the book. Any last thoughts? And then Erin and Ross, if you want to share anything as you're closing out, get that ready.
I mean, I could sit here and listen to you guys talk about this all day long. I mean, I truly think that it is what I think I just basically echoing what Lainey has talked about. I mean, I think it's creating a very approachable and accessible distilling this content, I think is really what this is, what the goal is of this. And it's not, I mean, so many times we talk about like, especially in education, when we come across these ideas, when we come across these initiatives, we try to put them in a box and we try to say like, oh, we are doing this, right? Like, I'm sure, I always share the story of an educator who came up to me and was like, I need you to teach me the Twitter. And I was like, whoa, the Twitter, right? Like, what does this mean? Why do we need, and I know all of us, the four of us are really big believers in why. I mean, Ross, you shared your why to begin with. And I think that is one of those elements that we have to know why we want to do this. And it's not that we want to do PBL because we want to do PBL. It's because it allows us to really create some synchronicity across learning. And it takes that, like we always talk about how, okay, well, you got to take this concept and now you've got to take the concept into the content. And now the content's got to now be applied into the context. Let me get all of my initials and letters in the right order there. But when it's moving that into that context that we often struggle with. And I think a lot of times it becomes that afterthought. We see that all the time in classes. We see it all the time in professional learning even, right? Like that we don't ever get to that context. We just talk about concept and content. And instead, if we really truly bring all of it together and keep it tightly create, mix it in really, really well to where it's not just like an afterthought of that like 9-week project at the very end. And now all of a sudden you're going to somehow thread in those elements together. I think instead, like if we keep in mind that we're not adding new things, what we're really trying to do with PBL is, create some of that, I think really even more like it's a more finely tuned focus. It allows you to create focus around context instead of siloing things out based off of content. And, like one of my favorite parts in the book is when you talk about initiative fatigue and how we're just constantly adding. And while many people may hear like, oh, great, now here come the PBL people that are going to come in here and try to teach us something new, it actually almost becomes like a sieve or, a colander, like to where now all of a sudden we can kind of like strain a lot of this stuff out through there. Like we can use PBL to be like that vehicle that we can push a lot of this stuff through and really cross a lot of those initiatives out by allowing them to be implemented through this form. So I just like, those are the big things that I've gotten out of this. And I really appreciate how you guys have the transition that you've had along the way, right? Like from that first book of like, okay, here we go. Here's our fifth, like, here's how we're going to do this. This is our experience with it. And this is what we did. And now just, again, I keep going back to Ross's why of like, you want to create the school that you wish you had when you were growing up. Like now you wrote the book you wish you had when you started doing PBL. Like, I think that's what you guys kind of did. And I think that that's such a gift to all of us as educators. So thank you for that gift and for being with us here. So there you go.
Awesome. All right. So I guess we'll do ladies first on this one, if that's not an antiquated notion. And Erin, just any final thoughts, and then make sure to share your handles and how people can get in touch with you.
Sure. No, I really appreciated being here. It's so incredible to have opportunity to talk about teaching and learning right now. I think that so much of our day to day is focused on like the things that need to get done versus like having the opportunity to talk about or think about teaching and learning and instruction. So I enjoyed having this conversation with you all. So thank you so much for including us in your dialogue. And my Twitter handle is at Murphy's Musings 5. So that's Murphy's with an S, Musings 5. And my website is psumurfet.com. Don't let your newlywed husband pick your email address because it will haunt you for the rest of your life. And I blame my super long Twitter handle on Ross because he signed me up for Twitter and did not tell me that a short handle would be more effective. So that's all his fault.
I'm all for blaming.
Before I really knew about the Twitter.
The Twitter, right?
You could have used a class on the Twitter. Like
I could have. Ross taught me that in the back of our grad class. So we were having our own class while we were in grad class.
That is true. That was like 2012. I remember being in grad class with Erin.
2011.
2011, and being on Twitter chats in 2011 while in grad class.
Yeah.
So, my handle is RossCoops31. My website, I need to start blogging again. It's terrible. I haven't blogged. Every week I'm like, I'm going to start blogging again, and I don't. Is RossCoops31.com, and my email is rosscoops31@gmail.com. So it's RossCoops31 for everything. Makes it easy. And the book's website is realpbl.com, by the way. Realpbl.com. It's referenced in the book, and everything there is free. I think for a couple things, a couple ebooks that are on there, you need an email sign up, but whatever. Everything's free, so we're not selling anything. And like I said, we created the website as the book was being written, so there's tight integration between the two.
Absolutely. I love it. Like I said, I literally went there and I was like, maybe this graphic I want to use is there. And I was like, yes, it is. And so then you all need to get this book that I got this graphic from. And of course I'm giving you guys credit and citing you. This has been such a fun conversation. It's just been, as I've said several times, I really enjoyed the book. So to be able to have this chat with all of you has been super fun. People, make sure to check out the book, go look up the website and follow Ross and Erin. They're amazing. And we're super grateful to have you here. So thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this batch of Lemonade Learning, please check out our website, lemonadelearning.us, for more resources. Be sure to subscribe today so you don't miss out on future lessons, laughter, or lemonade.
And if you're feeling really generous, please go to Apple Podcasts to submit a review so other educators know the value. One last thing, Learning and Lemonade are best together. So please connect with us on social media using the hashtag Lemonade Learning to share your story. Plus, we're always looking to give away stickers and swag.